From CRI Simple Numbers, this is Profitability Playbook, the Simple Numbers Podcast, a podcast for those who champion market growth and anchor the nation's economy, small businesses, and entrepreneurs.
All right, welcome to the Profitability Playbook. I'm Mike Maxson. That's Greg Crabtree and the man Brandon Gray with us today. If you were on the last podcast, we talked about overall labor efficiency, and I told you this was going to be a three-part series where we talked about overall labor efficiency, direct labor efficiency, and then management labor efficiency. So today we'll be discussing direct labor efficiency and the things and questions you might have surrounding that. What is it? So Greg, since you're the mastermind behind this, give us the update on direct labor efficiency.
Well, kind of the history of it, it started with in the first book, we really focused on total labor efficiency, gross margin being the numerator, all labor with no payroll taxes added as being the denominator. And that started off as kind of the first looking of things. And then we had a project, we refer to him as Client Zero, a landscaping company in Omaha, Nebraska, that we had decent data by division of his direct labor relative to everything else that was management. And we started playing around with, okay, well, let's see if we can take it one step and be more fine-tuned. And this really kind of led to segmenting a labor efficiency approach of saying, for every bucket of labor that I can isolate, that's always my denominator. For those of you that are fractions challenged, that's the bottom number of the fraction. The numerator being the number on top. What do those people create? What is their output? And this is kind of forever my comment about the weakness of percentages. Percentages are more of a reductive mindset versus a productivity mindset of saying, of an input of labor, what is my output? And so that's why we don't look at labor efficiency as a percentage of something. We look at it as an input output formula. And so as we started looking at it, we said, well, okay, the output is not revenue, the output is gross margin. That's the correct numerator for direct labor. And then we decided that contribution margin is really more so the output, or after direct labor is the number that we look at for management labor. And so in direct labor's case, we looked at it and said, okay, well, let's now, because we had divisions, what does this tell us? Because we had something to compare to. And so in comparing it to, they had landscaping, they had irrigation, they had lawn mowing and snow removal. Well, snow removal in Omaha is not all year round, and it is some years heavy and some years not at all. So in their case, we kind of set it to the side and then looked at the things that they did all year round was lawn care, irrigation, and landscaping. And come to find out, there was a significant multiplier effect. They got almost a 4 direct labor efficiency, $4 of gross margin for every dollar of labor in irrigation and landscaping, but they were only getting a $2.50 of leverage on lawn mowing. And the owner decided, well, we're going to share this, with our team and see what they think. And, and at that time, this tells you how long ago, because it was $10 an hour, was the labor cost of the person doing the mowing. And one of the mowers, and we shared this data with the team, and one of the mowers said, well, looks like to me, we shouldn't be in the mowing business. And, and he was exactly right. And to this day, they don't do mowing. They subcontract out. So they get a sales commission off of the mowing they sell, but they sub it to somebody else who's willing to have essentially a low margin, activity. And it really was fascinating. And so really from there, it led to us, starting to look at how do you use this number? Because we've got some industries that we have enough data that we can give you a really good target of what to aim for. But there's some strategies around, I can be high in one business and get away with being low in another one. And so there's some things about that. What I always tell people when we get into the subcomponents of labor efficiency is it's valuable to compare activities within your own business. So that's one thing that it does tell you on a static moment to moment basis. But the other thing that it also tells you is I can watch it move across time. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And as you see that movement, especially rolling 12, which we love, takes all the seasonality out of it. Am I consistently getting more and more efficient or less and less efficient? Or if I'm looking at rolling threes, I got to be sensitive to seasonality. So, certainly companies that have high seasons and low seasons, I've got to compare it to the same time frame of the previous year if I go with less than a rolling 12 number. But that's really the difference. Whereas, direct LER on total labor efficiency is really a health diagnostic that you can look at. But direct LER, you have to filter what is your strategy and then what is your season, and look at it from that way and say, what is the direction that it's flowing, better or worse?
Greg, one of the questions I get a lot, and I'm sure Brandon does too, and honestly, you still work with a lot of clients, so you probably get it every once in a while, is who do I include in my direct labor bucket?
Yeah, I've always taken the approach of, define who's in direct labor first, and then by default, everybody else is management labor. And we used to call it admin labor originally, and the management team kind of got snooty about it, and they said, well, I'm not admin. Okay, we'll just call it management labor. And so everybody's management labor if you're not direct. The rule of thumb that I use is if you're directly facing the customer or doing the thing that you make margin on 30% or greater of your hours that you work, I'm going to lean to having you into direct labor. You may be called a manager. That does not make you management labor. Especially like field services in our construction clients. Field supervisors, field managers, they're direct labor. They're the people who make you margin. And certainly it's not a science, but we really found that it's not, just make your call. The key is it's a butt in a bucket. You're either all direct labor or all management labor. You don't take a person and split them. That's just too arbitrary. And as long as you're consistent with that role across time, you're going to get comparability of data and that, but don't overstress it. If you got a person, just be consistent. That it's because once we get into the sub analysis of direct labor and management LER, it is about the flow of, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And what's that telling you? And that's the more important factor of it.
One of the things that I know I deal with, especially with some of my construction clients, and because they just have a lot of them, is subcontractors. And so we might have cases where a company uses a few subs, they use a lot of subs. They might be in an industry where, hey, we don't really want to be W-2 in this industry. We like being 1099, but they're used as a full-time employee. I got some of those. So what is your take around the companies out there facing that conundrum of going, hey, I use subs sometimes, all the time? Where are your thoughts?
What you're trying to do, we're not trying to be IRS compliant on direct labor being W-2 only. And here's kind of the way I describe it. If you're subcontracting a piece of the business to another company and you have to leave profit in there for them to be a viable company, they're a cost of goods. If I am using generally individuals, but paying them on a 1099 basis, I'm going to lean to those being direct labor, although it could be especially in construction, you could have a unique individual that is a subspecialty that, okay, I'm never going to do what they do. And, but it's kind of the clue. If I'm subcontracting out to somebody who's kind of like flex labor on call and they're a 1099 versus I've got somebody that does some of that same thing internally, that's kind of a clue that 1099 person is really direct labor. We see it in the professional services all the time. So like some of our clients who have legal services, they have a staff of legal people, but when they have a surge of cases, they'll go hire contract attorneys. Well, that contract attorney is direct labor. Just because you're paying them on a 1099 case by case basis, that doesn't change that character of it. But the key is if I'm subbing to another company who does that thing. And like I said, I have to leave profit in the equation for them to be a viable business. That's a clue that they're really a COGS. And I want to get down to, that gross margin number. That's really my true economic top line of the business.
Brandon, do you have any customers that you work with or have worked with where you might see salespeople in direct labor? I know I do have a client like that where we have salespeople in direct labor just because they're more of their job is to sell, and that is the business. They have a product, they sell it, and then they have a management team that obviously supports that. But explain that one for us if you've ever run into that.
Yeah, two kind of views there. So one is if sales is the product, then yes, they are actively involved in delivering what it is you make money on. And so they definitely would go in the direct labor bucket. Another approach that we sometimes will take, and even in some cases makes sales labor a subcomponent of direct LER to get a little bit more refined, but nonetheless, is if you think about direct labor efficiency and how you deploy direct labor, it has a limited capacity. You can only perform a task so quickly. You can only, if you're in professional services, you can only service so many clients or what have you. If you're in sales, there typically, in most cases, is almost like a ceiling that you can achieve in sales, generally speaking. And so if that person in the sales role is compensated 100% eat what you kill, every time you have a sale, you have labor associated with it, then you look at them many times in that direct labor pool as well. Because as you think about forecasting and where things are going, you're always going to have an increase in cost every time you have an increase in margin. And so that's many times how we'll put them in that bucket. Like I said, though, if you can separate, so let's say you're a blend, a great example of some of our clients that sell and install windows. Well, kind of have both. They're in the selling business and the installation business. Well, many times we'll look at those in different buckets within direct labor. We'll say, okay, what was installation in that direct LER? What was sales in that direct LER? And in many of those industries, that LER doesn't change because they're 100% at what you kill. It gets to a number and stays there.
Yeah,
awesome. And here's
let me add this. You'll get some instances where, like, you have inbound sales. So, like, if our clients who have warehouse labor, but they also have customer service labor who's taking inbound calls for orders. Those typically same kind of thing that, like Brandon started about. I would count those inbound customer service associates taking orders as direct labor, but we would do that. Okay, here's my warehouse labor relative to gross margin. Here's my customer service people relative to gross margin as a secondary calculation. I still got to be profitable. I still want to look at it in the main page in the total number. But once you get large enough and you start segmenting and people have isolated activities, that's where you can do some secondary analysis and see.
Awesome. Brandon, kick us off with this one. One of my favorite questions that I get. Well, they're direct, but they do some management, or they're management, but they do some direct. Where do I put them? I mean, they kind of do both, or they kind of, they're what. How do kick us off with that one? That one's always
kind of like what Greg was
one.
Greg was saying a little bit earlier. Where do you spend the majority of your time? What is the purpose of your role ultimately, from that standpoint? And in most businesses, there's going to be some overlap. But the key isn't necessarily as much about where you put them; it's the consistency of having them in your historical information and keeping them in there as you move forward. That's the most important thing, because you're going to gauge your labor efficiency, direct LER, based upon typically where have you ran in the past. We call it your Olympic best, because each company has a different business model. And the way that you leverage labor is somewhat of your secret sauce, in particular direct labor. And so if you did not have that person or that role in direct labor a year ago, and now you've added them, guess what? You're comparing apples to oranges. And so if you do make a move like that, you got to just be cognizant of that. But typically where do you spend the majority of your time? Don't lose a lot of sleep over it. We're not big fans of splitting up labor into, one person, and each week, how much was this, and this. It's kind of like, okay, butt in a bucket, just make a call and roll with it. Keep it simple. Anything that requires mental gymnastics, you're probably not going to do consistently.
And this brings us back, though, to the previous podcast episode on total labor efficiency. And if you're in one of the, especially with some of the small businesses out there where you got people doing multiple roles, wearing multiple hats, the famous quote there, that's where sometimes listen, they're going to be doing multiple things. Ask Greg what I did once upon a time when we were small, everything, right? Even HR, which we're all glad we survived that. But but that goes back to, hey, how do you leverage just a labor bucket as a whole? But here is direct, when you're then able to split it out.
Yeah, when I'm talking to like the million and under businesses, like the EO Accelerator program and those kind of businesses, a lot of times, I mean, the first thing I'm going to teach them is total LER. But the second thing,
Right.
once we move into the split between direct and management, I said, listen, you're the only management labor. Everybody else is direct. And so I like in that 500,000 and up range, 500 to a million. I'm going to teach them, you go into management, everybody else is direct, so that you learn to leverage other people's labor. That is the only way you grow a business. Now, the one exception to that is going to be if you're in professional services, where you are the highest value direct labor piece. So you're in legal, medical, financial, engineering, but you're the income producer. Everything revolves around you producing billable hours, which is, hey, it's still a valid, business model. And I think a lot of professional services businesses, when a high producing medical or legal or financial person thinks that they want to get out of the role of being the producer, that's a tough transition, because a lot of times that job that you're trying to get to isn't anywhere close to the value of you as a high producing professional. And there's plenty of models of where you can be the high producer and you essentially, your management role is more of a board of director overseeing your general manager, who's actually that office manager that every small practice runs. But those can be extraordinarily profitable enterprises when structured correctly. But the moment that you stop producing, you may be putting, a severe financial strain on the business, because it needs your production, to be viable.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and the next thing we want to talk about too is the famous one, and you touched on it a little bit of what's my number, right? And we talked before, hey, overall 2 labor efficiency, or sometimes in service-based businesses a 2 direct labor efficiency. But I know across my client base, I have a very diverse client base for myself. I'm kind of all over the place with direct labor efficiency, and we'll get into more where management might settle in. But on the direct side, I mean, I have someone that's at 8-9% profit at a 1.4 direct labor efficiency, and I have someone at 20% profit at a 2.5, and so it's a little bit all over the place in terms of where that number might settle. So across industries, it's different. But why don't you kick us off, Brandon, on in terms of, hey, where do we settle in with the direct labor efficiency target?
Well, like I said earlier, it's some of your secret sauce. Even within, you could take 2 companies that were both in the landscaping industry, they could have different LERs depending upon maybe what they specialized in, or even, how their scheduling was done, or their processes and systems. And so for a starting point, what you want to identify is, when were you running at your all-time best? Is that in recent history? Can I look at an R12, preferably R12, rolling 12, and see, when was I running at my best? We call it your Olympic best. And you can ask a Olympic athlete, how many gold medals do you have? And they start counting. And you say, what's your all-time best time? And they know it immediately. So I want to get back to, at minimum, my all-time best. And then I want to see, can I beat that? Okay. So let's just say your all-time best was a 2.2. I'll go, hey, in 3 months on an R12, I want to see if I can get to a 2.25. Make a little change, a little tweak. Okay, let's see if we can get to a 2, and you just keep pushing it. Now you will get to where the data will show you just start to level out from that standpoint, because once again, you can only do something so quickly and so efficiently. And then, you might get a breakthrough 6 months later around a process or a system or a technology or something like that. But generally speaking, you look at the past as kind of that indicator from that standpoint. So that's where you'll go to. And then you start to go, okay, well, how do I improve upon that? And so if I am seeing some consistency and I'm hitting those record highs, how do I get better? Or if I've fallen off quite a bit. So, the first thing that I'm going to look at, especially in the marketplace we're in today, is, are you charging appropriately? So where's your pricing at? If we haven't been increasing prices and labor has been going up, guess what? That LER is going to come down, especially if you're seeing material increases if you have a pass-through cost there that's involved. And so I want to make sure that I'm pricing correctly. Secondly, I want to make sure that I got the right people doing the right job that are paid the right amount, especially professional services. Can't tell you the number of times where we've looked at an IT provider and they have their top paid technician or engineer working on the account that they charge the least amount for and spending a significant amount of time on it. Well, you're going to have a low LER. You've got to have the right person. If it's junior level work, doing a junior level person that's paid a junior level amount. And so I'm looking at who's performing what, making sure that I get those in the right buckets from that standpoint. Many times what that ends up doing is freeing up your more valuable, well, I wouldn't say more valuable, but your higher billable resources to take on more client work at a higher dollar amount, higher margin. And so you can increase it from that standpoint as well. The third thing is I look at efficiency. If you have certain businesses are able to track LER, direct LER at the individual level. And so if you can look at this, it's a gold mine. You can start to look at each team member's LER and determine, okay, who's efficient, who's not efficient. So in those cases, you take your most efficient people, have them coach up those who aren't as efficient. Why is it they get so much more work done than someone else? And can I duplicate that? And then I start looking at systems and processes. David McClaskey Excellence Institute. Y'all have heard us talk about him many times. Friend of simple numbers. He's probably the best in the world at designing systems and processes and helping you put in a system to do such and implement it in your business. And, there's a reason why Chick-fil-A and Pals do what they do. Their labor efficiency is really high because of the system and process that they have behind it. So those are all just a handful of things as you kind of look at where you were, where you want to get to, and ways.
So if you look at it conceptually, a higher labor efficiency means you're more value add with what you do. How do I add value? The lowest direct labor efficiency of any model is a staffing model, because all you're doing as a staffing business is you're finding the person, sending them to the company for them to accept or reject, and you're running payroll for them. And you just fish another human out of the pond if they don't like it. And so that direct LER is, I've seen as low as 1.25. The average is probably in the 135 to 140 range, because essentially the marketplace is saying you're paying about 10% is the minimum payroll taxes and unemployment insurance and that kind of thing. And so if I'm paying $1.40, if I'm getting $1.40 labor efficiency ratio for every $100 of wages that I'm paying, I'm able to bill the customer 140, for that. And so $10 of that goes to payroll taxes. So I got $30 left. And out of that $30, that's what the market is saying. I'm willing to give you value to having found that person and running their payroll. That's all. You don't manage them. You don't teach them anything. You just found a human and pay a human. As you move up the scale, the first thing that happens is you start to add management and oversight. And so a next good example is commercial cleaning. So in commercial cleaning, probably the direct LER is about 1.6 or 1.7. It's largely a staffing model, but with a little bit of light management. I do have to have somebody to make sure that they showed up, and all those things. A little more coordination. I got to have communication with that person to make sure that they're there. But it doesn't take a lot to teach somebody how to clean a toilet. And so there, that adds a little more value. And then government contracting. There's a lot of government contracting at the $1.70, $1.80 level of what we call body shop contracts. Essentially, I'm a high level staffing business, a little harder in recruiting, a little higher benefit package of what these people have, but I'm essentially a staffing business to a piece of a large government contract, that is just providing people. I'm probably a sub to somebody who's really making all the critical decisions. So that's kind of a high-end staffing. Once you get to a 2 and above is where you're really adding value to the human process. And then you will probably start to move into the 2.5 and 2.25, 2.5 range when you are a knowledge specialty. And so as you move upscale, now the thing is you got to have just a little bit of skill of, can I have consistency of demand for that knowledge specialty. And then where you start to get beyond the 2.25 and 2.5 is where I'm selling a product or providing something else with it. That direct labor person is not the complete, aspect, of that job. And so you see it in a lot, like in construction. If you're a specialty contractor, your direct LER can be about a 2.5 to a 3, but you've got it. It's really important for your administrative and management team to make sure, am I on contract? Am I on target? Did I bid it correctly? A lot of bid and proposal costs, a lot of overhead, and those things. And then as you move further up, then it's, like I mentioned in landscaping, I can have a 4 direct LER in landscaping and irrigation. Well, that's because I'm also deploying a product that I get some margin on. So that margin of the product plus the value of the labor, when you take those two added together, that escalates the margin, that labor efficiency of that person. But I wouldn't have sold the bark and the plants had it not been the person to put it in. I'm not a plant. I'm not a nursery. I'm someone who takes nursery goods. But there again, those plants and bark don't get there by themselves. A human still has to deal with those. And so that is kind of the evolution of, as you see LER moving up the value chain, that is really the market telling you how much they value your labor and how well you built a system. And like Brandon mentioned in Powell's case, that most people would look at how many people that they have in one of their little hamburger locations, about 1,100 square feet, with just a hallway through there, and you've got 25 people in this little bitty space, but everything is moving through in perfect efficiency in 36 seconds from order to completion. And you're not going to get that in a Subway. You're not even going to get it in a Chick-fil-A, in that process. But the right labor at the right time with the right tools gets you really high on that, and that makes you, one of the top in the industry.
Yeah, one of the things I found too is those businesses that are growing, when it gets intense, sales are increasing month over month, and the pressure is there to add labor. It comes down to, hey, it's just that I need to add labor. And when a lot of times when they come to us, you come to find out that hey, you might be overstaffed. Well, you might be overstaffed, maybe not from a body standpoint, from a labor dollar standpoint, where you've just added the labor and not thinking about, hey, do I have the right person doing the right work at the right rate? And so you'll end up seeing these overinflated labor numbers on companies that are growing, and they can't understand why they're getting that profit. And it's up there in that engine under that direct labor number where, hey, because I haven't leveraged or understood the leveraging of that direct labor, they end up tanking their profit from it. And I'll use Greg Crabtree as a great example, and Brandon's on here too, because me and him have been doing this with Greg for a long time. You never just came to Greg and said, hey, I just need to hire someone. It's always been, okay, well, why, who, and at what level, and at what rate, and what are we going to need them to do, and show me the numbers that justify, hey, where do we get better hiring this person? That's the next evolution for companies that are growing and looking at their data is how do I leverage each bucket here? And before I go hire a senior attorney, do I have actual senior attorney work to do it, or is it associate level work? And I'm just frantic, but I found a good person, I'm just going to hire him, but I could never bill them out at the rate they need to. So something to think about as you all out there are growing and scaling that business.
Well, and also in kind of that labor grid, people think that you get more efficient as you get bigger. You actually don't, because I've got to coordinate with a lot more people, and you start losing some coverage. That person it's real easy to have a person fully utilized, when you're small, but the problem is they might be fully utilized, but they're working on the wrong things. Economically, they're not fully utilized. They're working down rate all the time. And I always talk about it. So, you don't start at people do this backwards. They fill up the bottom end of their labor scale in productivity and try to climb their way to the top. No, you fill up the most valuable people first and work your way down and find, what can I delegate? What can I push down to a lower cost, and make sure that when I push down work, that I trade that time for something productive and not just spend more time answering emails and surfing the web in that process. But I'll tell you, I mean, we are in a massive productivity crisis right now. I mean, across the board, we're paying more and more money for direct labor and getting less and less for it. And the people who can fight and beat that trend are going to win in the next 10 years in the economy.
Yeah, one more thing too I want to touch on is those of you out there do operate under contracts, especially in the small business world, yearly contracts, 3-year contracts. Had a lot of clients get bit over that the last couple of years with the labor increases, the cost increases, where they were locked in and didn't have some sort of escalator for whether materials or the labor costs, what have you, or just an annual increase. At worst case, put in just an annual increase, but make sure you're reviewing them, right? Out of scope, change orders, all these things are massive. And sometimes you get in there in these direct labor numbers and wow, I don't know why. I don't have a lot of staff, but our direct labor efficiency is going down. Come to find out, that tech that goes on site, well, he was supposed to go there to just upgrade the server. And next thing you know, he goes and helps Brandon with his Excel issue, talks to Greg for 30 minutes and about his computer. And next thing you know, you've just been there 3 hours and no one got a bill for it. And so keep that in mind too on contracts, change orders, renewals, things like that. They got to think.
But they were busy. Oh,
that's right.
Yeah.
So
avoid
busy.
Avoid the busy monster and make sure you're being productive. And so,
Yeah. Don't confuse activity with
There
accomplishment.
you go. We'll end on that one. Well, all right, guys. Great conversation on direct labor efficiency, and we'll wrap up the complete picture on labor efficiency on the next episode with management labor. So keep working out there. Stay hustling, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Thank you.
If you want to know more about driving sustainable profitability for your business or are interested in learning more about CRI Simple Numbers, please visit our website at simplenumberscri.com. Thanks for listening to this episode of Profitability Playbook, the Simple Numbers Podcast. You can subscribe to Profitability Playbook on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you prefer to listen to podcasts. If you liked what you heard today, please leave us a review. The views expressed on Profitability Playbook, the Simple Numbers Podcast, are those of the presenter and moderator and do not necessarily reflect the views of CRI Simple Numbers or the CRI family of companies. This podcast is intended for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional advice received directly. Consult with your CRI Simple Numbers advisor or another trusted professional if you have questions about your specific situation.